All right, well, Shabbat Shalom again, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
All right, amen, amen. We're going to continue on. It's really a continuation from last week. Um, I feel the need just to remind you as we keep going through these lessons, and we've been at them for quite some time. Um, I remember the words of Trevor Loudon. He did a video. Oh my goodness, it was several months ago. I remember. I forgot what the topic was, but he had mentioned, and he's not even from this country. I think he's from New Zealand. But he had said, uh, if America falls, and this is from somebody that wasn't born or raised here. He said, but if America falls, it's the West falls. And what is so important to know, if the West falls, this world gets dark really quick. So what's unfortunate is we're witnessing on a daily basis America being dismantled. We talked about, in this volume of lessons, we're talking about climate change. And I brought up to you last week that it is being implemented, at least a term, to really transform this nation. I got into the very end of last week, and we started talking about how climate change in a term is intricately linked with equity and housing. Let me get a little bit more into it, finish my thought from last time. Penny Starr wrote for the Federalist, and again, I'm bringing up a lot of articles and information, and sometimes it can be so tedious, but it's very important that you grab this stuff. She writes, the focus of President Joe Biden's $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill is allegedly to address aging infrastructure across the country. But the massive bill covers a vast amount of other spending, including money for, quote unquote, diversifying neighborhoods. This portion of Biden's American Jobs Plan would change zoning laws to end single-family home neighborhoods and allow for multiple unit, quote unquote, affordable or low-income rental housing. Okay. If you've paid any attention to the news, Title 42 will be ending very soon. And 1,500 troops have been sent to the southwest border. Okay. Not to combat and keep back the illegals that are pouring across, but to actually process them. Because there's not enough help to process all the illegals that will be pouring across the open border. The estimate, and this is a low number, is 10,000 migrants a day. If you do the math, 70,000 over a week, millions perhaps, lowball 3 million in a year, high 5 million a year. By the end of the decade, upwards around 50. So we're looking at a population in the United States of about 400 million people by just the end of the decade. And that's probably being generous. Now, you might have to think with all these, and I'm going to use their term, climate refugees that are coming, 10,000 a day. Well, they got to live somewhere. Wonder where. According to the White House fact sheet, the housing effort is, quote, their words, an innovative new approach to eliminate state and local exclusionary zoning laws which drive up the cost of construction and keep families from moving to neighborhoods with more opportunities for them and their kids. For decades, exclusionary zoning laws like minimum lot sizes, mandatory parking requirements, and prohibitions on multifamily housing have inflated housing and construction costs and locked families out of areas with more opportunities, the fact sheet states. President Biden is calling on Congress to enact an innovative new competitive grant program that awards flexible and attractive funding to jurisdictions that take concrete steps to eliminate such needless barriers to producing affordable housing. And it's almost like you can insert the Charlie Brown teacher, on and on and on. Reuters also reported on the shift from free markets to government control. Quote, President Joe Biden is seeking to ease a national affordable housing shortage by pushing local governments to allow apartment buildings in neighborhoods that are currently restricted to single-family homes. Just let me interject. So if that were to happen, you have an entire housing development, let's say, and they're all single-family homes, right? And let's, I don't know, drop a multi-unit apartment building because the migrants got to go somewhere. What would happen to the property value of your house? Wait for it. The proposal, which would provide financial incentive to local governments that change zoning laws restricting many neighborhoods to single-family homes, is an example of the sort of broad social policy changes Democrats are including in Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure bill. Okay, here's the incentives. When you see potholes being taken care of, right, and roads being worked on and bridges being worked on, right, and I don't know who Bob is, but Bob is making a lot of money off of Bob's barricades. Whoever Bob is, I wish my name was Bob. Okay, because they're everywhere. All right. Now, those dollars that are being used for that construction are federal dollars. Okay? That's federal money that's paying to fix those roads and bridges, not state or local, federal dollars. So in other words, here we go. Let's say Boynton or Boca or what have you, and you don't want to go ahead and change your zoning laws, right, to allow all these multi-unit dwellings to pop up in your neighborhood. You want to keep your single-family homes and your little HOAs and everything, and you don't want to do it. Well, guess what? We'll just hold back the federal dollars from you. Now, you may say, well, wait a minute, that's blackmail. Correct. And so when your roads and everything start falling apart, well, all you got to do is change your zoning law. Welcome to communism. Spectre of Communism writes, Maurice Strong was the founder and first executive director of the UN Environment Program. Strong, a Canadian, also organized UN conferences, including the 1972 Conference on the Human Environment and the 1992 Conference on Environment and Development. So this is going back decades. He was deeply influenced by his cousin, Anna Louise Strong, a well-known pro-communist journalist who supported the Chinese Communist movement and was buried in China. Strong described himself as, quote, a socialist in ideology, a capitalist in methodology. Strong came to occupy an important place in the global environmental movement. The views espoused by the UN agency, led by Strong, appear almost identical to Marxist theory. The preamble to the report of the 1976 World Conference on Human Settlement, 76, this didn't happen yesterday, read, quote, private land ownership. All of you people you own your own home, okay. Private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulating wealth. That's true, right? I mean, you can buy a property, you can buy a house, 100 grand, right? And then you fix it up. You work on it, you knock out a wall, you make open concept, you do this, you put in a pool. You can do all these changes to a house, and what do? And the property values go up. It's not like a car. They appreciate. So you can turn around, you can take a $100,000 house, sell it for $175,000, and you accumulate wealth. Watch. So you have the right to do that. You thought you did. Private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulating wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. The fact that you want to own your own home and your own property and do something with it so you can turn around and sell it for more, that's social injustice. Public control, not private, public control of land use is therefore indispensable. So, have you ever heard of Event 201? Event 201 was a 3.5-hour tabletop exercise. In fact, the videos are online, and I checked a few days ago just to make sure they were still there. And they're there. It's amazing because nobody really reported on it. But you have very, very influential people that all met in New York City in October of 2019. Keep that month and date. Keep that in. Everybody say it all at once. October 2019. Good. All right. So in October of 2019, they all got together in New York City. And we're discussing things. And they said, what if, not that it would ever happen, but what if, I don't know, a coronavirus was unleashed on the world? Not that that'll ever happen. October of 2019. Not that it'll ever happen. How would we handle it? And the Center for Health Security said that the only way a problem like that could be solved is through private business and global governing, all masked under the banner of climate change. Then, and if you've heard of, remember I was talking about the 17 SDGs, developmental goals, there's 17 of them. Well, 11.3, Target 11.3 of the wonderful World Economic Forum. This is what it states, quote, by 2030, enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated, and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries, end quote. In other words, people need to be taken out of rural areas. Remember, urban sprawl. We're spread out too much because of all you capitalists and your single-family homes. So people need to be taken out of the rural areas and herded into cities. I don't know, 15-minute cities or something. And eliminate all these single-family homes. You fat, lazy Americans. Capitalists, Christians, how dare you? So, maybe you've known, maybe you don't know, but so much farmland is now being purchased, taken over by the government and Communist China for some reason, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But farmland all across America is just being gobbled up. And obviously, you've got some very important people saying, well, we got to have some place to put the wind turbines. So we'll just buy up farmland under, guess what, like eminent domain. So we have a place to build all the wind turbines. Now I'm thinking to myself, now wait a minute. So the government's buying up all this farmland. And 10,000 immigrants, illegals, are streaming across the border every day. where are they going to live and what are they going to eat? Because we're buying up the farmland. Well, I guess we'll just have to eat less. If you don't think it's going to happen, it's happening in the Netherlands now. Just this week, the Dutch government said they need to take 2,000 to 3,000 farms, and they'll, by eminent domain, so they will give you, I read it, the Dutch government will give the farmers 100% of whatever it's worth. But the government wants the farm. The EU has said, oh, by the way, when you take the money, you're not allowed to be a farmer anywhere in Europe. So once you leave the Netherlands, it's not like I think I'm going to go to Germany or France and be a farmer there. No, you're not permitted to. So we'll give it to you. We'll give you the money, and we take the farm. Oh, but now the government is saying, but if we don't get the 2,000 to 3,000 farms, right, voluntarily, we'll just take them. The goal of the World Economic Forum, they're not hiding it. Single-family homes will no longer be for sale. And that's interesting because you've got people that hate capitalism, right? I mean, we must get rid of capitalism. It's destroying the planet. Yet one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, just spent $3.2 million. Where she got the money from, being a Marxist in a capitalist, I don't know. But she spent $3.2 million buying 4 homes. So man, capitalism is doing good for her. Just you can't own a single-family home. If you're living in Martha's Vineyard, you can have a single-family home. Aspen, Colorado, Van Nuys, Beverly Hills, you can have a single-family home. Just not you people. Mark Levin, he writes, therefore, principles upon which America was founded, such as private property rights. People know the line, of course, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's Thomas Jefferson. Okay. Thomas Jefferson kind of stole the line from John Locke. John Locke didn't write life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Locke, who was an English philosopher, said life, liberty, and property. You have the right to own your own property. You have the right to own your own home because you have a right to life. God gave it to you. You should have the means to support yourself. That was Locke. So private property rights, the free flow of commerce, voluntary exchange, the sanctity of the individual, the establishment of a government around these principles, which is intended to undergird these principles and limit its own authority to molest or alter them, are totally dismissed. Specter writes, while environmentalism is an ideology concerned with protecting the environment against general damage and misuse, ecology concerns the relationship between living things and their environment, and thus provides the theoretical basis for defining the harm done to the environment. Remember? Mother Earth. Eco-Marxism takes these ideas a step further, adding the concept of ecological crises to augment its arguments about the economic collapse of capitalism. It seeks to expand the supposed conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat by adding an inherent conflict between production and the environment. This is the theory of double crisis or double conflict. In Marxist theory, the primary conflict of capitalism is between productive forces and the relations of production, while the secondary conflict happens between the environment of production, the ecosystem, and the productive forces or capitalism. In a Marxist view, the primary conflict leads to economic crisis, while the secondary conflict leads to ecological crisis. The last century has proven wrong the Marxist prediction that capitalism would collapse in on itself. On the contrary, it continues to prosper. To keep up the fight against capitalism and private business, communists hijacked legitimate environmental concerns and created an environmentalist ideology rooted in Marxist theory, adopting the new rallying cry of quote-unquote ecological collapse. See? So you take the old Marxism and you just kind of revamp it, repackage it, because we're trying to save Mother Earth from all you capitalists out there. Nicholas Loris wrote an article. This is interesting. Well, it's all interesting. Far less challenging is assessing the cost of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's Suggested Policy, that's IPCC. Listen carefully. The report proposes a massive carbon tax of between $135 and $5,500 by 2030. So it's an additional tax that you will pay, depending on, of course, your income, between $135 and over $5,000, and that would be per carbon ton. So let's say, as I'm looking on it, if you were trying to lay the concrete for a 3,000 foot or square foot structure, you lay the concrete. With the carbon tax, the price immediately goes up $37,000, just like that, because of the carbon tax. Since 80% of Americans' energy needs are met by coal, oil, and natural gas, a carbon tax of this magnitude would cause electricity rates and gas prices to skyrocket to astronomical levels. Now, gas is, I saw it driving here, $3.56 a gallon, $3.59 a gallon. It's somewhere on in there. It goes up, it comes down. All right. They're saying by the turn of the decade, with the carbon tax, that same gallon of gas, that's $3.56 a gallon, would go to $150 a gallon. Now I know what you're thinking. I'm going to go broke. That's the whole point. But the economic pain wouldn't stop there. Families would end up paying more for food, healthcare, education, clothes, you name it. Such a massive energy tax would bankrupt families and businesses and undoubtedly catapult the world into economic despair. So, of course, they tried it in Australia. I don't know, I think it was like 2015 or so, I read about it. And in 2 years, they had so many people go bankrupt and they lost everything. In just 2 years, Australia repealed the carbon tax. So we can't do this anymore because so many people are going poor. That was just one country. Wait till they do it around the world. The average monthly cost for you, give or take, you would have to pay another $550 a month. Just the carbon tax. So again, don't complain, because this is your fault. If it wasn't for you, I said, and that Bible of yours, and that capitalism, we wouldn't have to save Mother Earth. But now, because of you, so don't complain, don't cry about it. You're successful, you're living in your fancy single-family home, got your own property. Some of you even drive your own car, or you have 2 cars. How dare you? Ought to be ashamed of yourself. We got to fix this planet because of you. But when you do go broke, at least you can think, hey, we saved the planet. So you see, it's old Marxism, it's new Marxism. The old Marxism, you're exploiting the poor. New Marxism, you're exploiting Mother Earth. Same concept. You're exploiting the poor. You're exploiting the air and the water and the land. Oh, one political science professor. Man, these guys are smart. I'm glad we're in good hands. One political science professor, Dr. Timothy Luke, even said our American capitalism, and this is you people, our American capitalism and way of life is actually, his words, quote, altering the Earth's atmosphere. And what is the only way that we can reverse course before we go extinct as a human race? His words, quote, an equitable communist order. The Margarita Declaration on Climate Change, quote, reading their own stuff, we must organize to guarantee life on the planet through a great world social movement. Smell Antichrist in the air. A change of attitude for a conscience of power keeping the peoples united becomes necessary. As organized people, we can push for the transformation of the system. The Spectre writes, as its name suggests, eco-socialism is an ideology combining ecology and socialism, inserting typical socialist demands such as social justice. Remember, the simple fact that you own your own home is social injustice. Their words. Okay. We got to change that. Along with ecological concerns is an attempt to advance socialist ideology in new ways. A good illustration of eco-socialism is the book, The Eco-Socialist Manifesto, written in 2001 by Yoel Koval and Michael Lurie. Koval was an anti-Vietnam War activist and later psychiatry professor who ran unsuccessfully for the Green Party presidential nomination 2000. Lurie, a sociologist, is a member of the Trotskyists, Fourth International. In the manifesto, the authors resolve to, quote, build a movement that can replace capitalism with a society in which, listen, common ownership of the means of production replaces capitalist ownership. And in which the preservation and restoration of ecosystems will be a fundamental part of all human activity. They did not view eco-socialism as merely a branch of socialism, but rather as the new name of socialism in a new era. So again, from private property and you owning your own home to common ownership. See, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Slogans at these events have included, quote, system change, not climate change. Capitalism is killing us. Capitalism is destroying the environment. Capitalism is killing the planet. And fight for a socialist future. Now, there was so much information on carbon dioxide. And I'm looking at it, and I know my limitations. Okay? I am not a scientist. And nor do I try to play one on TV. All right, carbon dioxide, the natural carbon dioxide. This I do know, has never been, is not, nor can it ever be a pollutant. Oh, please. CO2 is oxygen to plants, okay? Plants take the CO2 and turn it into oxygen for us. Okay, it's amazing how God operates. If he existed, but too bad he doesn't. Do you remember there was a guy, it was a long time ago, you may remember, Tucker Carlson. What happens when you kind of put stuff out there about the establishment? The uniparty, all right? This is one of the few that understood there is no such thing as Democrats, Republicans anymore. There's just one party, all right? One's trying to burn the country down, the other's like trying to get in the gas, That's how it operates. So he put their stuff out there, and of course now he's sitting at home. But he said in one of his shows that a 50-minute flight on a private jet creates as much carbon emissions, a 50-minute flight on a private jet creates as much carbon emissions as your car does over an entire year. Yet, when John Kerry was presented with this back in 2019, this is what he said, quote, "It's the only choice for someone like me who is traveling the world in order to win this battle. I believe the time it takes me to get somewhere, I can't sail across the ocean. I have to fly to meet with people to get things done." See? So he's important. You, not so much. He gets to fly on private jets. You, well, I hope you got a bike. Carlson went on. In a 4-year period, the UN climate envoy, Michael Bloomberg, took more than 1,700 private flights, burning more than 10,000 metric tons of CO2. In contrast, your car emits less than 5 metric tons in a year. See? He gets to fly the plane. You're out of luck. So how is all of this climate science researched? I'm glad you asked. Through government grants. And at this point, you're going, government grants? Wait a minute. Isn't that from our tax dollars? Correct. So they take your tax dollars, give it to these very important people who come back and say, guess what? We need to take more of their money. Ian Plimer, professor of earth sciences at University of Melbourne, and they ought to know about the carbon tax. Quote, "Climate change catastrophism is the biggest scientific fraud that has ever occurred. Most climate science is political ideology dressed up as science. There are times in history when the popular consensus is demonstrably wrong, and we live in such a time. Cheap energy is fundamental for employment, living in the modern world, and for bringing the third world out of poverty. Furthermore, the education system has been captured by activists, and the young are inculcated with environmental, political, and economic ideology. During their education, these same young people are not given the basic critical and analytical methods to evaluate ideology that has been presented as fact." So in other words, yeah, if that's all you got is TikTok, you're not getting the whole story. Richard Lindzen, atmospheric physicist, former professor of meteorology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Quote, "Global warming is about politics and power rather than science. In science, there is an attempt to clarify. In global warming, language is misused in order to confuse and mislead the public. The misuse of language extends to the use of climate models. Advocates of policies allegedly addressing global warming use models not to predict, but rather to justify the claim that catastrophe is possible, as they understand proving something to be impossible is itself almost impossible." Steve Koonin, Dr. Steve Koonin, who, if you listen, it's one of those guys when you listen to like Dr. Jordan Peterson, it's like, what did he say? You know, because that level of intellect is just off the charts. Physicist, PhD from MIT, quote, "Humans exert a growing but physically small warming influence on the climate. The results from many different climate models disagree with or even contradict each other and many kinds of observations. In short, the science is insufficient to make useful predictions about how the climate will change over the coming decades, much less what effect our actions will have on it." So it's really interesting because fossil fuels, which is now the big enemy, has actually reduced carbon dioxide. Think about it. Fossil fuels has reduced carbon dioxide. But that still didn't stop, unfortunately, for some reason, our president from shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline, day one of his administration. On that day, 11,000 people lost their jobs. Now, climate czar John Kerry was quick to come to the podium, to assure everybody, hey, those who lost their jobs, think of all the wonderful jobs they'll get by making solar panels and all those things. And those 11,000 people are still waiting. But isn't it something how you can transport fuel? What do you think is safer? Transport fuel through a pipeline, or, I don't know, put it on a train and let's send it through, I don't know, East Palestine or something. Which is safer? Okay, so by now you're thinking, why are we committing economic suicide? We're doing it to ourselves. And don't you realize, if we do commit economic suicide, and we're rapidly getting there, then America as a superpower, how about the leading superpower, will go by the wayside. And like my mentor taught me, nature abhors a vacuum. So if America, which has for, well, up until the last several decades, stood for truth and justice and biblical principles and ethics, if that country is done away with, well, some other nation will take its place. And when that other nation, whatever it may be, takes its place as the dominant world superpower, will that nation that take its place uphold truth and the gospel? Will that nation be a force for good or for evil? Chuck Todd, January the 2nd on 2019. This should tell you how corrupt things are. These are the words he spoke on NBC's Meet the Press. This was 4 years ago. Quote, just as important as what we are going to do this hour is what we're not going to do. We're not going to debate climate change, the existence of it. The earth is getting hotter, and human activity is a major cause, period. We're not going to give time to climate deniers. The science is settled, even if political opinion is not. And we're not going to confuse weather with climate. A heat wave is not more evidence that climate change exists than a blizzard means that it doesn't, unless the blizzard hits Miami. We do have a panel of experts with us today to help us understand the science and consequences of climate change. And yes, ideas to break the political paralysis over it, end quote. So you have a major news organization, NBC, who just told you, we're not going to investigate this. We're not going to discuss it. And anybody that has a credible argument will not be permitted to talk. In fact, not only will they not be able to talk and present their argument, we're actually going to take this science and we're going to reinforce it. And what's interesting about NBC is that as evil as America is, bad America, climate change, global warming, it's fascinating. They never talk about China. What about China? Specter writes, one of the biggest issues affecting the environment is pollution. Despite erasing hundreds of millions of people from China's future generations, the CCP's growth-intensive economic model consumes energy at a prodigious rate, making the People's Republic of China the world's biggest polluter, with the worst big city air pollution and severe water pollution. Water from the vast majority of rivers in mainland China is no longer safe to drink. Contaminated air from China blows across the sea to Korea and Japan, even crossing the Pacific Ocean to reach the American West Coast. Logically, genuine environmentalists should make communist China the main target of their criticisms. But curiously, many praise the CCP and even view it as the hope for environmental protection. The Communist Party USA, just in case you didn't know that the Communist Party existed in the United States, the Communist Party USA news website, People's World, has reported extensively on environmental news. The main theme of its reports was the claim that the Trump administration's environmental policies would destroy the country and even the world, while the CCP is the force for its salvation. Peter Schweizer, talk about another guy putting a lot of stuff out there, wrote a book, Red Handed. He exposed Republicans, he exposed Democrats, entertainment people, sports athletes, a whole bunch of people taking money from communist China. The list is rather interesting. I always thought that was treason. He writes, concerns about climate change have become a powerful tool for Beijing to divert attention from human rights and other issues. In September 2021, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi delivered a speech at Cambridge University in which she acknowledged China's genocide of the Uyghurs, while proclaiming that partnering with China on climate change was the, quote, overriding issue. So you see, we know they're slaughtering their people, but we got to work with them on climate change. So the president has set the greenhouse gas pollution reduction target aimed at 50 to 52% by 2030, and has stated that he wants the United States to be totally 100% carbon free by 2035. Yet, China is using more coal than any nation in the world. Five times more than the United States. So, in a great strategic plan, China is disempowering the United States while empowering themselves in a position where the world will have to purchase power from them. How fascinating. So all you other nations, you need to close down your coal-fired plants. And we are doing that here in America. They're building them. The whole time. We're committing suicide, and they're building them. Steve Wilkow said the scale of China's expansion in Africa is just mind-blowing. In less than 10 years, since Chinese authorities called for mineral resources diversification globally, remember, all you people, you need to change. The number of major mining mineral processing assets in Africa with China headquartered companies' interest increased from only a handful in 2006 to more than 120 in 2015. So it's as if they know something we don't. Like they're positioning themselves, while we're going to destroy the United States, we're putting ourselves in a position to take over the world. Mining.com, December 15, 2015, asked, if they were building like that 6 years ago, how many mining plants do you think they have now? Good old National Public Radio. And who doesn't listen to NPR? Solar, wind, and other renewables, already growing rapidly, would produce roughly half the country's electricity by 2030. But China is the world's largest solar panel producer. So they're building coal-fired plants and producing the solar panels that we will be needing for energy in our country, because we're not producing our own energy. 2.6 million Uyghur slaves are being forced to work in 135 labor camps. And of the top 10 solar companies in the world, 8 are Chinese. In order to make these solar panels, It takes electricity. So China is making the solar panels. I wonder how they're producing the electricity. Coal plants. Oh, the same coal plants that we're closing down. And they're building them. Biden's infrastructure proposal calls for $175 billion in subsidies for electric vehicles. In fact, U.S. passenger vehicles account for only about 2.4% of global greenhouse emissions. The average distance an electric car can go on a single charge is 193 miles. But about 40% of Americans don't live in single-family homes where you could have a personal charger. So how are you going to get around? By the way, I just heard this yesterday. You know, our vice president loves what? Electric school buses. I don't know if you've ever heard that video. She just loves electric school buses. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, which I told you had what embedded inside of it, the Green New Deal, right? So in the Inflation Reduction Act, which has very little to do with inflation at all, but nevertheless, there's over $1 billion to purchase electric school buses because all the diesel-powered ones have to come off the road. Okay? Now, you may think to yourself, man, well, that's awesome. Over $1 billion to buy electric school buses. Well, that's good. We won't be using diesel anymore. A diesel school bus costs $100,000. An electric school bus costs $400,000. So if you do the math, a little bit more than $1 billion at $400,000 a school bus, you would come up with a number of about 3,000 electric school buses. Now, do you want to know how many school buses we have in the United States? 500,000. So where's the other 497,000 school buses going to come from? Who knows? I guess we won't be able to send children to school anymore, just remote learning, because they won't have a way to they'll have to stay at home. No way to get to school. Only going to have about 3,000, 4,000 school buses. Can't have the diesel-powered ones on the road anymore. So the children have to be taught at school. Well, wait a minute. But that means somebody's got to stay at home with the children. I don't know. Might have to quit your job. I'm sure they figured all this out. I'm glad we got smart people figuring all these things out so we don't have to worry. According to Live Science, a 2014 study published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences looked at the entire life cycle of an EV's emissions, electric vehicle, from mining the metals required for the batteries to producing the electricity needed to power them. And then compare this with the average emissions of a gas-powered vehicle. So you got to produce the electric vehicle. You need all the minerals and everything to produce the batteries. Okay, so what's this really going to cost us? Good. The team found that when electric vehicles are charged with coal-powered electricity, they're actually worse for the environment than conventional gasoline cars. So acquiring these minerals would actually be more harmful to the environment because you got to get the minerals to make the batteries, right? Well, where are you going to get the minerals from? Well, I'm glad you asked, because many of the minerals that we need for the batteries for the electric cars, many of those minerals are in Africa. Wait a minute, didn't we just learn that China's buying up like all this land and all these mineral factories in Africa? To make an electric car, you need lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite. So to meet consumer demands, we would need a quadrupling of mineral requirements for clean energy technology by 2040. And what country is the largest producer of these minerals? China. In closing. So, We were talking, uh, truth be told, it's a sad statement to make concerning when you say America. Because America at one time, the America my mother grew up, my father came to, that America is not this one. This America, over the last several decades, number of decades, has become an evil nation. It is a nation that has plundered other nations and taken advantage of other nations. And I was in a conversation with my wife about this. I said, you know, God has preserved his Bible for us. History's there, and God doesn't change. When you turn your back on God, he will allow you to be plundered. Okay? Egypt. When Israel walked out of Egypt, what did they do to Egypt? They plundered Egypt. David, in all of his victories, what did he do to the enemy? Plundered them. But when Israel turned its back on God, what did God do? I'm going to raise up the Assyrians. And then, guess what? Then I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. Because the Babylonians, you're going to take out the Assyrians. Oh, Babylon, you forgot who I am. So guess what? Now I'm going to raise up the Medes. And when you turn your back on God, God will allow your nation to be plundered. That's how he operates. So in conversation with so many of the nations, has America plundered so many nations around the world? Yes. So corrupt. Evil business people. Well, guess what? As they say, chickens come home to roost. This is a nation that, again, 50 years ago told God, we are going to slaughter your children. The very children that you put in the wombs of women, we are going to take them and kill them to the tune of over 60 million. And God doesn't forget. And so guess what, America? Yeah, you have plundered a number of nations over the last several decades. Greedy business people, corrupt politicians. Now, God is raising up another nation on the other side of the world. And as you see, that nation is starting to plunder this one. God doesn't change. Final words. Mark Levin writes, the climate change movement, previously global cooling and global warming, is a degrowth, anti-capitalism movement that will impoverish Americans. At bottom, it is a broad-based war on your property rights, liberty, and way of life. More broadly, it is an attack on the most successful economic system known to mankind and massively expands the power of the federal bureaucracy, politicians, and international global institutions to manage, dictate, and control infinite aspects of our society and economy through regulations and mandates under the guise of public health and safety, clean air, clean water, and even national security. It will make the abuses of power we saw and experienced from reckless and tyrannical state governments in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and the grievous violations of civil and religious liberties pale by comparison. If you thought government took advantage of people a couple years ago in 2021, you haven't seen anything yet. Father, we thank you that we know you, that you chose us, that you saved us. Our names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and those names are there forever. We are your children. You are our Father, our provider, and our king, that gives us hope. That's our faith. We also know that there are some dark times ahead. Dark times for this country. And Lord, truth be told, we deserve it. We deserve it as a nation. We deserve to be plundered. We have plundered a number of nations down through the years. We've taken advantage of them. And now that day has come. And we know, Lord, we know, as you said yourself, we know the mysteries. We can see what is happening on a world scale. We can see what's happening over in the Far East. You are raising up another nation. Unfortunately, Lord, it's not like the nation that you rose up here back in the 18th century, a nation of godly men, a nation of men who revered you and honored your word. No, this time you're raising up another people, people who do not know you, people who hate your people, and you're raising them up, and you're giving them, or going to give them, an extreme amount of power. Lord, all we can do is continue to understand what your word says, stay true to your word, certainly never fear, never worry. Lord, as well, we also have a responsibility to warn other people, to warn our relatives, to warn our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers. Understand that this lifestyle, this wonderful lifestyle that we have enjoyed for so many years, someday soon they're going to come to an end. And Lord, we know that you are certainly able to and willing to do mighty miracles. In those days, Lord, when things get very dark, I pray, Lord, that your church, your people, would rise up in the midst of the tyranny, in the midst of a soon coming one world government. And Lord, that we would stand up for your name's sake, that we would bear your truth, we would tell people about your goodness and your salvation, and a kingdom which is coming, a kingdom which is coming which will dispose of all of these kingdoms. We look forward to that day, Lord. And so help us be prepared, help us to get stronger in our walk, in our faith, in our witness. And Lord, when we see you on that day, we all long to hear, well done. So we lift up all of these prayers as well as these petitions to you. In Yeshua's name as always. Amen.